know what kind of time we have, but I have more questions for you. In your TED Talk, I'm going to ask you anyway. In your TED Talk, one thing that really stood out to me, I believe it was your aunt. Um,
Yes.
so I'm going to let you tell the story, but it just really stood out to me that somebody could be so strong. And I wanted to get into kick-ass people because I hear you say that a lot. Could you tell us that story about your
Yeah,
aunt?
you bet. So the name of the TEDx was Redefining Badass. And one of the things, Colleen, um, my late girlfriend, used to always tease me about how badass I was as a business owner, a rock climber, an Ironman. Um, she would always tease me about how badass I was. And as a guy that I told you earlier, I was always more geek than jock. I kind of took that to heart, and I it really made me feel pride when she we teased me with that. In 2015, in August of 2015, we went to Penticton where I was going to be competing in a half Ironman, and that's where I got a real lesson in what it means to be a badass. So my aunt Sharon lives in Penticton, and she's 65 years oldish at the time. Not overly fit, not overly active, maybe even a little bit overweight. So we had finished the race and ended up at her place for dinner the next night. And she started telling us this story about how, she wanted to get a little bit more fit, a little bit more active this year. So when she saw that I was coming to town, she looked up the race and they had a 5K fun run the day before the big race. So she decided to sign up. She says, I knew full well I was going to be dead last, but I wanted to do this anyways. So she tells us a story. Yeah, I signed up. I went to the start line. I got way at the back of the pack because I'm going to be dead last, but I didn't care. So the gun goes, she takes off, and she's telling us this story. She says, there's about a kilometer left to go, and all of a sudden, this kid on a bike starts riding beside me. And she says, I looked over at him. I said, "You're here because I'm last, aren't you?" And he says, "Yep, I'm afraid so." He says, "But you're doing great. You're doing great." And he starts cheering her in. And so he rides with her that whole last kilometer to the finish line. And they get within 100 meters or so of the finish line. And he says, "Okay, I'm going to ride ahead and let him know you're coming in." She's like, "Oh, no, 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 no." And she looks up and she can see they've already started tearing down the finish line. They've already started packing up the PA system. So he rides ahead, lets them know that she's still out on course. Well, they set everything back up again. Not only did they set everything back up, they said a fellow by the name of Jeff Simon's out to run in with her. And Jeff Simon's a professional triathlete. He won, I think, the 2017 Melbourne Ironman. Like, he's a badass um, triathlete. So Sharon finishes telling us this story. She gets up from dinner, goes into the kitchen, and Colleen just looks at me and she says, "You know what, Mike?" She goes, "Now that's fucking badass." And I just thought, yes, having the courage to compete in a race that you know full well you're going to finish dead last, that takes courage. That takes guts. That's badass. It's not about winning that 5K race. It's about having the courage to compete. And I told this story I went and spoke to a group of college athletics. It was 100 men, 100 male athletes from their leadership program, and I told that story. And I remember when I first got in the room, the guys were kind of, they had all been voluntold to be there, so they didn't really want to be there, and they were all sort of burping and farting and scratching and not paying a lot of attention. But as the story unfolded, I could tell that I'm starting to get their attention. And I remember asking them at the end of that, like, so how many of you guys would have the balls to compete in an event that you knew full well you were going to finish dead last? And I knew, and these are all fairly high level athletics. And I thought, yeah, probably none of you. If you knew you were going to finish dead last, I doubt you would actually compete. So yeah, that to me just is the epitome of what it means to be a badass. And again, why I believe we need to redefine what it means to be a badass. Having that courage to be vulnerable. It was the drive home. We talked about that story the entire drive home, and we were listening to Tim Ferriss, and he had Brene Brown on. And Brene, he asked Brene something to the effect of, what do you think of the over feminization of boys in our school system? And again, she handled it brilliantly. She talked about, I don't believe that masculine and feminine are mutually exclusive. She said, in fact, I believe that the combination the right combination of tough and tender is the perfect equation for badassery. And for me, that kind of brought it all home. And then, of course, you know, it was just a month and a bit later that Colleen was murdered. So again, that sort of story and this guy's actions, who, you know, he probably figured himself somewhat of a badass. You know, we need to redefine what it means to be a badass.